Every 80s kid thinks they watched the best cartoons, but they didn't.
Well, little buddy, maybe you're wrong.
Because the real gems with insane animation and nightmare-level villains and storylines that hit harder than any modern show.
Why, son? Is there a problem?
Yeah.
Got completely forgotten while everyone replayed the same 5 shows. This is the 10 greatest 1980s cartoons you've probably never seen, and we're counting down to the one cartoon that changed everything.
You're right, Snarf. But how?
So stick around to number 1, because I guarantee your entire view of 80s cartoons will be rewritten by the end. Hit subscribe, and turn on that bell, because this channel brings back what the world forgot. Coming in at number 10, we have Centurions, which dropped in 1986.
You both did just fine.
And the reason this show deserves to be here is because it gave us modular battle armor 30 years before the MCU made it cool. 3 specialists named Ace McCloud and Jake Rockwell and Max Ray wore exoframes that received full weapon systems beamed down from an orbiting space station directly onto their bodies, mid-battle, and every time they yelled, "Power Extreme."
Power Extreme!
The weapons locked on click by click with every bolt and panel snapping into place, which made it feel mechanical and real unlike any other transformation on TV. And the villain Doc Terror had already cut away half his own body to become a machine, and his endgame wasn't just world domination, it was the complete extinction of biological humanity, which is insanely dark for a kids' show. The toy line had snap-on weapon systems, so kids were literally engineering their own loadouts, but Centurions only ran 65 episodes and vanished with no reboot and no revival, even though it predicted wearable combat tech decades early. But if Centurions brought futuristic tech to the battlefield, then the next one took that ambition and dropped it into deep space with one of the darkest villain concepts the 80s ever produced. At number 9, we have Galaxy Rangers, which also hit screens in 1986.
Crown agents.
Stay alert, everyone.
And this show took the American Western genre and set it in deep space in the year 2086. And it wasn't campy at all, because in the very first episode, the team leader Zachary Fox had his wife captured by the Queen of the Crown, who literally ripped her soul from her body and used her life force as a power source. And that wasn't a one-off plot point because the entire series was driven by Zachary's mission to get her back. And every time he activated his bionic arm, it was powered by the captured essence of his own wife, which is genuine tragedy built into the DNA of the show. The Queen of the Crown consumed psychic energy and turned living beings into mindless drones called slaverlords, and her entire empire ran on stolen life force, which is nightmare fuel for any age. The cartoon was animated by TMS in Japan, and the result looked like a feature film in places, but Galaxy Rangers aired in syndication with thin marketing, so it never found the audience it deserved. Now, if Galaxy Rangers mixed westerns with space, then the next cartoon did the same thing, but gave its lawman the strength of a bear and a talking horse with a giant laser rifle. Number 8 is BraveStarr, and it landed in 1987 as one of Filmation's final productions, which was the same studio behind He-Man, and it was set on a planet called New Texas, following Marshal BraveStarr, who was a Native American lawman drawing his powers from spirit animals. But what puts BraveStarr in a league of its own is that it did an episode about drug addiction where a kid got hooked on a substance called spin and actually died on screen. A child character died from a drug overdose in an afternoon cartoon, and that episode, called The Price, is still talked about as one of the bravest moments in children's programming because it told kids the truth without sugarcoating anything. BraveStarr's Native American heritage was central to his character and his powers, which mattered for kids who rarely saw that representation on screen, and his horse. 3030 was a cybernetic equine that could stand upright and talk and carry a weapon called Sarah Jane that looked like it belonged on a battleship. But the toy line underperformed, and the studio shut down, so BraveStarr never hit the fame of He-Man, even though it absolutely deserved it. But if BraveStarr brought the law to the galaxy, then the next cartoon brought it to the skies with a team of cyborg cops who didn't need spaceships because they were the spaceships. At number 7, we have SilverHawks, which aired in 1986.
The SilverHawks!
And was made by the exact same team behind Thundercats, which was Rankin Bass, with visuals by Pacific Animation Corporation, and that alone tells you the quality level. The heroes were human volunteers who had their bodies surgically enhanced with metal and cybernetic upgrades so they could survive and fight in the vacuum of space without ships or suits, just their own rebuilt bodies flying through the stars, and the villain Monstar was an alien mob boss who, when exposed to the Moonstar's power, would transform into a massive armored behemoth riding a giant weaponized space squid named Skyrunner, and his transformation was genuinely terrifying because his body cracked and reformed, and his voice deepened in a way that had kids equally scared and mesmerized. What made SilverHawks unique was that the heroes didn't get into vehicles, they were the vehicles, and their bodies were the technology, but the show ran 65 episodes in the shadow of Thundercats and faded even though it was wilder and more daring than it ever got credit for. But if SilverHawks turned humans into flying machines, then the next cartoon hid its machines inside ordinary vehicles, and that concept made it one of the most addictive shows of the decade. Number 6 is M.A.S.K.
We got a submission, T-Bob!
Which debuted back in 1985, and the whole concept was basically Transformers meets G.I. Joe because it gave us ordinary vehicles that transformed into combat machines with hidden weapons and flight modes. Matt Tracker led a secret task force whose vehicles looked normal until activation, so a Camaro called Thunderhawk sprouted wings and became a jet, and a motorcycle called Condor split into a helicopter, and every team member wore a powered 47. M.A.S.K granting unique abilities like energy beams or anti-gravity fields. The villain Miles Mayhem was a former ally of Matt Tracker who betrayed the team, so every fight between them felt personal, and the toy line was where M.A.S.K truly conquered, because those die-cast vehicles with hidden transformation, gimmicks, and spring-loaded weapons had kids addicted to the satisfying click of every hidden panel. M.A.S.K ran 75 episodes, but the second season shifted to racing, which killed its edge, and despite a massive fan base, it never got the revival that Transformers and G.I. Joe enjoyed. Now we're in the top 5, and the next cartoon didn't just have cool vehicles, it had 5 robot lions that combined into one of the most iconic giant robots in cartoon history. Coming in at number 5 is Voltron.
We're all set. Are we cleared for launch?
Which first aired in 1984, adapted from the Japanese anime M.A.S.K Go Lion, and it followed 5 pilots named Keith and Lance and Sven and Hunk and Pidge, who each controlled a robotic lion that could combine into Voltron, which was a colossal super robot. The way every episode built to that combination sequence, with Keith commanding form feet and legs and form arms and body and I'll form the head, is burned into the memory of an entire generation, because it wasn't just a transformation, it was a promise that no matter how bad things got, the team could come together and become unstoppable. These pilots actually cared about each other and mourned Sven when he fell in battle, and when all else failed, Voltron would form the blazing sword and end it in one sweeping strike that landed like a freight train every single time. The die-cast Voltron toy with 5 separable lions remains one of the most collectible toys of the 80s, and the 2016 Netflix reboot proved the concept still resonates, but for original fans, nothing replaces that first combination on a grainy television. But if Voltron proved teamwork could create something unstoppable, then the next entry proved 80s cartoons could tell stories so rich they belong in a museum. Number 4 is The Mysterious Cities of Gold.
You? Is it really you?
And it goes all the way back to 1982, making it the oldest entry on this list, and it's completely different from everything else here because it used real 16th century history as its foundation, following Esteban, a Spanish orphan boy voyaging to the New World with Zia, a young Incan girl, and Tao, the last descendant of the lost empire of Mu. The colonization of the Americas and the Incan Empire and Mayan ruins, and the brutality of the conquistadors were all part of the story, and the show never sugarcoated the darkness because there were real stakes and real loss. But woven through that history was science fiction, because the cities of gold housed solar-powered technology from an ancient civilization. And in 1982, a cartoon was teaching kids about solar power through mythology and colonial history, which is staggering ambition. The visuals by Deke Entertainment and Studio Pierrot gave the landscapes of South America a warmth that made them feel alive, and every episode ended with a live-action documentary explaining the real history. It became a cultural touchstone in France and Japan, and received a sequel in 2012, but the original remains untouchable. Now we enter the top 3, and the next entry wasn't just a show, it was a cultural event that became part of the English language. At number 3, we have G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero, which launched in 1983 through Sunbow and Marvel Productions, and became one of the most successful cartoon series in history, with a cast of hundreds of distinct characters. Snake Eyes, the silent ninja commando, became one of the most iconic characters in all of 80s pop culture, and Cobra Commander and Destro and the Baroness weren't just villains, they were events, and Serpentor was a genetic emperor. built from the DNA of history's greatest conquerors. The Hasbro toy line with 3 3/4-inch figures and file cards on every package built an entire universe that kids lived in for hours. And the USS Flag aircraft carrier at 7 feet long remains the holy grail of 80s collecting. And Now You Know and Knowing Is Half the Battle transcended the show and became part of everyday language, which is something almost no cartoon has ever achieved. G.I. Joe spawned comics and movies and reboots, but nothing captures the energy of the original Sunbow series. But if G.I. Joe was the action powerhouse, then the next entry was its mythological equal because it didn't just create characters, it created an entire mythology. Number 2 is He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and it also arrived in 1983, and this is the big bang of 80s cartoon merchandising.
For our help, how can we refuse her request?
Because before He-Man toy-based cartoons were cheap cash grabs, and after He-Man they were a billion-dollar industry. Filmation's adaptation of Mattel's line created Eternia, where medieval sorcery collided with futuristic technology, and Prince Adam wielded the Sword of Power to become the strongest warrior alive. And Skeletor, with a skull for a face and a havoc staff, crackling with dark magic, was terrifying to 5-year-olds and hilarious to everyone else, which made him one of the most beloved villains in cartoon history. The transformation where Adam raises the sword and lightning strikes and his body surges with energy is the most iconic transformation of the entire decade, and every kid tried to recreate it with a stick in the backyard. Castle Grayskull and Snake Mountain and the massive toy line were Mattel's crown jewel, and the franchise spawned She-Ra and a 2002 reboot, and the 2021 Netflix continuation proving fans still care. Decades later, He-Man wasn't a cartoon, it was mythology. But there's one cartoon above everything, because it combined the action and the mythology and the visuals and the villains into one perfect package that nothing has ever matched. And at number 1, sitting right at the top, we have Thundercats, which hit the airwaves in 1985.
What should I do, Jaka?
Created by Tobin Wolfe and produced by Rankin Bass, with Japanese visuals by Pacific Animation Corporation. Lion-O was one of the most interesting heroes of the decade because a stasis pod malfunction aged his body to adulthood while leaving his mind as a child's, so he had to earn his leadership episode by episode, which is a real character arc. Panthro drove the Thunder Tank, and Cheetara's super speed made her one of the most formidable female characters of the decade, and every member of that team was unforgettable. And Mum-Ra the Everliving is one of the greatest cartoon villains of all time, because in his base form, he was a frail, bandaged figure in a black pyramid. But when he called upon the ancient spirits of evil, he became a towering, winged demon, and that transformation still terrifies adults who watched it as children because it wasn't cool, it was horrifying. The Japanese production brought fluidity that American studios couldn't match, and when Lion-O raised the Sword of Omens and the eye opened, and the Thundercats signal blazed across the sky, every kid was on their feet. Thundercats ran 130 episodes across 4 seasons and combined the mythological grandeur of He-Man and the sci-fi ambition of SilverHawks and the character depth of Galaxy Rangers into something that remains lightning in a bottle, and that's exactly why it sits at number 1. And that was the 10 greatest 1980s cartoons you've probably never seen, and every one of these shows deserved more than what the world gave them. These weren't just toy commercials, they were complete worlds with cyborg lawmen and soul-stealing queens and robot lions and cat aliens, and every kid who raced home from school or woke up at dawn on Saturdays carried these stories into adulthood. Drop your favorite in the comments and tell me the one I missed, and if you want to keep going deeper into forgotten 80s cartoons, then watch this video right here, 10 Forgotten Cartoon Heroes of the 80s, because you don't want to miss it.